If there's one thing to take away from this whole situation, it's go to a doctor. I'll get into this more once I actually start like telling the story, but I truly was showing almost no symptoms of appendicitis. So really, if anything seems even remotely wrong, go get it checked out. And then just a couple of warnings before I start getting into this. I'm probably going to be sharing some like TMI details. You clicked on a story about a surgery, what are you expecting? And then also I will be showing my scars at some point. If you're squeamish about that thing, I will give a warning right beforehand, and then I will also let you know when they're no longer on the screen so that you know it's safe to look back. So this all started about a year and a half ago. Kind of a weird beginning to an appendicitis story, but just stay with me. It was summer of 2022, and I had the worst stomach ache I've ever had in my life. And it was kind of typical of appendicitis. It started like upper middle of my belly here and then kind of settled onto my right side. And as it was happening, I was actually a little bit concerned that it might be my appendix. But I was living with my parents at the time, and I went downstairs to tell my dad, like, hey, I have a really bad stomach ache right now and I don't know what's going on. And we took my temperature was normal, and then he kind of like pressed on my side to see if I had any rebound pain, and I didn't. So at the time, we were just like, okay, I'm gonna lay down for a bit, drink some water, see if I feel better, and then if it doesn't start to subside, then like we'll go to the urgent care. And so kind of two things to note about that situation. One is that probably about 4 hours after the pain started, my period also started. So at that point, I was kind of like, maybe I just had like a stomach ache or gas pains or something, and then I was also having period cramps, and it kind of just like sent my body into a frenzy for a bit. But then the other thing is that like by the end of that day, the pain had kind of started to subside. It did take probably a week for the pain to fully go away, but it was only that intense pain for the first maybe 6 hours. Which is a long time to be in pain, but still. And then after that, it was just like this dull cramping in my right side. So it was one of those things where that whole week I was like, I should go to a doctor and get this checked out. And then I never did. And then for the year and a half after that, I kept being like, I just need to establish a relationship with a primary care physician no matter what. I should just make a doctor appointment, and then when I go in, I can mention, also last summer I had this weird stomach pain. Do you know what that might have been? Never did any of that. And I still don't know if that pain was related to my appendix or if it was just a coincidence. Who knows? Regardless, we're gonna now fast forward to a few weeks ago. It's the Monday after Thanksgiving, and that night I get very similar stomach pains. Where again, this is the one thing that's like sort of indicative of appendicitis. It started in the middle of my stomach and then moved over to my right side. But at the time when it first started, I was like, it's a few days after Thanksgiving. And then I did a Friendsgiving. And so it was a lot of days in a row of eating a lot of food. So I initially was like, these are probably just really bad, like gas pains or indigestion, or like something that I ate is bothering me, or just the quantity that I ate is bothering me. So I really wasn't thinking anything of it. I figured after the night it would pass. I barely slept that night. Ended up taking the next day off of work, not because I was still in a lot of pain, but just because I was exhausted from not sleeping. But I was still in a little bit of pain. But again, just like the year and a half prior, it was that like dull cramping on my right side. Not debilitating, but noticeable. And that night, I happened to be doing something with my parents, and I kind of brought up like, I have that pain again. And my mom, mother's intuition, she was like, if you're still in pain tomorrow, even just a tiny little bit of pain, go to the urgent care, get it checked out. So the next morning, it's now Wednesday, I have just like a whisper of a cramp. Like it barely hurts, but I'm like, there's still a little bit of pain, and I hemmed and hawed a little bit. And then eventually I was like, okay, you know what? I should go to the urgent care. And at this point, I'm hoping that they just like have an ultrasound there and they can kind of take a look around and tell me what it is. And then from there, I can make an appointment with the specialist to like actually get the situation figured out. And mind you, at this point, I do not think it's my appendix. I'm like, it's more likely to be nothing than it is to be my appendix. So anyways, I go to the urgent care. They unfortunately didn't have any like screening devices, so no ultrasound, no CAT scan, like nothing to actually like really get a look at what's going on inside. They talked to me about my pain, they kind of press around on my stomach a little bit, they like take my vitals, whatever. And they also take a urine sample. So at this point we've kind of pinpointed the pain, at least where I was feeling it, was like kind of upper right abdomen, right by where my ribs are in my right abdomen, which again, not where appendicitis pain usually is. To the point where like you go to the urgent care with any stomach pain and they're immediately like, you have appendicitis, go to the emergency room. And even at the urgent care, they were like, we don't think it's your appendix. So based on the way that the pain was presenting and the fact that I wasn't running a fever, they thought that it was probably a gallbladder issue. And then the other thing, as I said, they took a urine sample and they did find blood in my urine. So they were like, go to the emergency room now. Here's what I'll say about that. I had had my period the week before. I think it was just residual period blood. I did Google it later, and actually trace amounts of blood in your urine can happen with appendicitis, but it's not very common. Horses, not zebras, or whatever the saying is, like it was probably residual period blood. But I didn't want to risk it, right? You hear that there's blood in your urine, it kind of freaks you out. So I was like, okay, I'll go to the emergency room just to be safe. Totally lucked out with the timing getting to the emergency room. I was one of the only people there when I got there, got taken back to a room probably within like 10 minutes. Yeah, I got very, very lucky with that. Especially because over the course of my time there, I think about 6 ambulances came in. At this point, my mom comes to meet me to hang out with me in the emergency room. As soon as I get taken back, I'm like immediately hooked up to an IV, and she and I are just laughing. Because we're like, this is completely ridiculous. Like, this is such overkill. There's no way that there's anything that serious going on. Little did we know what was about to happen. Similar to the urgent care, you take my temperature, take my vitals. They took another urine sample. It's a miracle I was able to pee again. Granted, I was hooked up to an IV that probably did help. Yeah, talking about my pain, pressing on my stomach, whatever, the works. They also took some blood at the emergency room. Weird sign number whatever. So we've already established pain sitting in a weird spot, temperature is normal. I haven't really talked about this, but like I didn't have any nausea, like I didn't have any of the symptoms of appendicitis, including my white blood cell counts were normal. Like nothing about this was pointing to appendicitis. Granted, in hindsight, there's probably a reason for that I'll get into. They also think it's my gallbladder. So again, they're like, we don't think it's appendicitis, it's probably a gallbladder issue, or it's nothing. So they called for a gallbladder ultrasound, and they don't find anything in the ultrasound. Other than I had a couple of polyps on my gallbladder, but they were like, those shouldn't be bothering you. So at this point, just to kind of cover the bases, they're like, we're gonna send you in for a CT scan. So that way we can get a look at the whole abdomen, and if anything seems off, then we can let you know. But also at this point, they're basically preparing me for like, we're probably not gonna find anything. But I'm kind of like, hey, if we don't find anything, that's great. No news is good news in this situation. Like if nothing is wrong, then I just have a tummy ache and in a few days it'll go away and that's fine. So yeah, they send me up for a CT scan, which you may or may not have heard when you get a CT scan, it makes you feel like you're peeing your pants. And maybe it's just because I was warned about it ahead of time. It doesn't really feel like you're peeing your pants. I can see though, that if you were not warned about the warm sensation, that you might in that moment be like, oh my god, I'm peeing my pants. Anyways, that's just a silly little tidbit. Moving on from that, doctor comes back with the results and he's like, so you have appendicitis. And he sounded as confused as I felt when he was breaking that news to me. I remember it took me a couple seconds to even like process what he had said. I was so shocked, and so was he. I remember him saying like, I couldn't believe it when I saw, which is the first of 2 times I had a doctor say that to me, which is not really something you want a medical professional to be saying about what's going on inside your body. So yeah, at this point they start prepping me for surgery. I have a bunch of questionnaires I need to answer. There's some stuff they need to gather about your medical history for like the anesthetic purposes. And then, you know, like, do they have permission to resuscitate you if needed? They do also do like a sort of mental wellness check. And I just remember one of the questions was like, do you feel peaceful right now? And I just looked at the nurse and she looked at me and she was like, I know, it's a crazy question. We are wheeling you off into an emergency surgery and we're asking if you feel peaceful right now. Like, obviously you don't. So once I got to the surgical wing, I was in just like a little holding room and I met the surgeon. He explained the procedure to me. So I got a laparoscopic surgery. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to be able to explain this perfectly. If you're really curious, you can just Google like laparoscopic appendectomy and it'll explain the whole process. But basically they make like 3 tiny incisions. I'm assuming they insert a camera into one of them and then they basically like blow your stomach up with gas and then, you know, snip off the appendix, pull it out. So yeah, it's like super quick, super easy procedure. I think the whole thing only took like a half hour and then they glue you up afterwards, so I got lucky, no stitches. I did have a little cry. As I was being wheeled off into the OR, I did have a little cry because I was terrified. This is like the first major surgery of my life and my first time going under anesthesia, and I was so scared. And I remember apologizing to the nurses, being like, I just cry when I get nervous. And they were like, dude, don't worry about it, it's super normal. But it really is, it's like you blink and it's over. Because I remember, you know, being put onto the operating table and I'm in like an all-white room staring up at a fluorescent light, and there's a nurse next to me being like, hey, how are you feeling? Are you doing okay? And then I blinked and I was in an all-white room staring up at a fluorescent light with the nurse next to me being like, hey, how are you feeling? Are you doing okay? And it took me a few seconds to be like, I'm in a different room and that's a different nurse. And like, what's going on? I'm pretty sure the first thing I said when I woke up was just, it's already over. Also, funny story for me being in the recovery room. And granted, I had just woken up from anesthesia. I was probably on some sort of narcotic. I might not be remembering this correctly, but what I remember is that the nurse said, hey, your mom's in the waiting room outside. Is it okay if she comes back here? And I was like, yeah, she can come back here. But according to my mother, what happened is that the nurse went out there and was like, she's asking for you. Which, like, no offense to my mom, but I was not asking for you. That is not the relationship that my mother and I have. So my mom told me about that later on, being like, I was so confused because that doesn't seem like you. And I was like, yeah, because that's not what fucking happened. So yeah, then I spent the night in the hospital, slept surprisingly well, probably because it was an exhausting day and I needed the sleep. Also, nothing worse than having to hit the call button so that you can use the bathroom. There's nothing that feels more patronizing than having to like ask for permission and help to use the bathroom. Luckily, I only needed to do it once because I was moving around well enough the first time I called the nurse to help me use the bathroom that he was like, you have full permission to like get up on your own. And not only that, but I was actually like encouraged to get up and pace around occasionally. So I kind of did that like every hour or so. I'd get up and pace around for a few minutes and then lay back down, and that was my hospital stay for the most part. The next morning, the physical therapist actually came to like get me up and fully like walk me around the hallway, get me walking up and down stairs. And it was really funny because she happened to walk in while I was already up and pacing around in my room. But it was nice to like actually get up and really walk around instead of just going back and forth in my tiny little hospital room. But yeah, at that point I was moving around pretty well. I was able to handle the stairs. So she was like, yeah, as long as you can eat, you're like good to go. And I forgot to mention, for breakfast, I was on a full liquid diet. So I basically had like pudding and yogurt for breakfast. I handled the liquid diet well, so then I was given permission for lunch to get solid food. So once the PT kind of gave the okay that I was like moving around fine, basically the only thing left was like eat some solid food and make sure you're able to keep it down. So yeah, once I did that, I was able to sign the discharge papers and go home. Then I spent probably about a week at my parents' place just as I was recovering, and then once I felt decent, I I came back to my apartment. Some just like random notes about the recovery. Where the 3 incisions are, there's like one on my left side, and then like one on my belly button, and then one kind of like right below my waistline. Last 2, like basically never bothered me at all. The one on my left side hurt like a bitch, which makes sense. It like went through the most muscle. It's also the incision that they actually pulled the appendix out of, which probably tore the muscles even more. And I was warned ahead of time, like that's gonna be the one that's giving you issues. Anytime that I went to like sit up, it was so painful. Like once I got into a sitting position or into a laying down position, I was fine. It was the moving between the 2 that sucked. It's actually kind of funny because I was in way more pain after the surgery than I was before. For most surgeries, it's like, yeah, that's the way it works. But typically for an appendectomy, it's like the appendicitis was so painful that the recovery is like nothing in comparison. Also, as I mentioned during the procedure, they like pump you up with gas. So typically when there's gas in your body, it's in your digestive system. 1, you know what that gas pain feels like. 2, there's 2 like pretty clear exits for the gas to, you know, work its way out of. But in this case, the gas is kind of just in like the empty space. It's not inside any of your organs. It's like in the negative space between your organs. And so it basically works its way like up kind of under your rib cage and then out your shoulders. I also kind of felt it in my neck. But yeah, just a very bizarre sensation having gas pains in your shoulders. And that was something that I was told was going to happen, but you really don't understand it until you're feeling it. I did also need to sleep on my back for several days. That wasn't like doctor's orders, it was just so painful to be laying on my side. But I'm such a side sleeper, dude. I cannot sleep on my back. I actually had to kind of fashion like a hospital bed out of pillows, because I truly just like could not sleep if I was flat on my back. I needed to be at an incline. Okay, here's like a super TMI detail. It took probably like 4 days for me to poop. Because you go under anesthesia and it kind of shuts off your digestive system. And then in addition to that, like obviously my digestive system had just been through some trauma with the surgery. It just kind of took a while to get things rolling again. And then even after I did finally poop for the first time, it probably took another like week before it resembled something even remotely close to like a normal poop. Okay, moving away from that. The last like little recovery detail that I can think of off the top of my head, I had phantom IV in my arm for several days afterwards. Sorry for anybody who's like squeamish about needles, I am too, so just bear with me for a second. I had my IV like in my elbow, and it is like when you have a needle in your arm like that, you can really only bend it to about like, my sleeves are too poofy, you can't see what I'm doing. You can bend it to about here. I was so happy when I finally got the IV taken out. But then it was for a few days afterwards, it still felt like there was a needle in my arm. And I would get nervous anytime I bent my arm further than just like a tiny little bit, because I felt like I was about to start feeling it poking. Moving off of that, but while I'm talking about the recovery process, I'm gonna show you guys the incisions now. So if you don't want to see it, look away. I'll let you know and you can look back. And yes, I am wearing pajama pants and I don't want to hear any judgment. You can see this here is like the big guy. This is the one who was giving me the most issues. It's also the one that they pulled the appendix out of. And then I don't even know if you can see it. It's like right at the bottom of my belly button here. There's another one. And then the third one is like down here, so I'm not gonna show it to you guys. Okay, scars are off the screen for anybody who needed to look away. Yeah, the recovery went very smoothly. I was back at work like the next week. Granted, I do work from home, so that made things a little bit easier. But even so, I did go into my office like a little less than 2 weeks post-op with the absolute bare bones in my backpack because I wasn't allowed to lift more than 10 pounds. But still, I was able to make the trip in and back, no problem. So yeah, fairly speedy, easy recovery post-laparoscopic surgery. Those first few days were a bitch though. And then I had a follow-up appointment at a family clinic about a week post-op, which was mainly to like hopefully establish a primary care relationship with them. So I think after this whole situation, I've learned my lesson. And then I had my follow-up with the surgeon about 2 weeks post-op. It was a few days ago now at the time of me filming. And there's a twist to this story. There was some good news and some bad news at that post-op appointment. Good news is the incisions are healing nicely. I was given permission to go back to my normal activity level. Like, everything recovery-wise from this surgery is going well. Bad news, and I'm laughing because I don't really know how to process it. It turns out that I have cancer. Or maybe had cancer, hopefully. Need to make some follow-up appointments to look into that, so we'll see. And I have not talked about this with anyone except for my parents. Literally nobody else in my life knows, and for some reason I'm talking about it with a bunch of strangers on the internet. And I'm just now having the realization that there might be people in my real life who see this video. So if you are somebody who knows me in real life, and this is how you're finding out that I have cancer, sorry. It's not that I'm like trying to keep secrets from people, or that I like don't trust people or don't want to confide in people or whatever. It's just that it's probably a non-issue, and I don't want to freak people out. It's a very real possibility, and frankly the most likely possibility, that all of it was contained in my appendix, and that my brave battle with cancer is already over. I just need to actually confirm. But yeah, once I have more information about what's going on, whether it's I'm all in the clear, or whether it's spread to other places in your body and now we need to do XYZ to handle it, that's when I'm going to start talking about it with other people. But right now I don't have all the information, and I don't want to worry people when there might not even be anything to worry about. And frankly, I'm not that worried about it myself. So anyways, rewind, let's talk about what's actually going on. Basically the reason why my appendix was inflamed is because I had a tumor in my appendix, and it is a very low-grade cancer. And it was sitting at the tip of my appendix, kind of away from any of the rest of my organs. And then also like the edges looked clean. And so all of that combined, it's like so unlikely that it spread anywhere else in my body. But there was still cancer in my body. So I need to make some follow-up appointments. Oh, and this, if you remember earlier, I said there were 2 times where a doctor told me I couldn't believe it. This was the second time. But in the meantime, I have an appointment with an oncologist in January, and I'm expecting probably more doctor's appointments after that. I was a little bit too in shock when my doctor told me about it to ask any like follow-up questions. So in hindsight, I'm like, I should have asked, what is the oncology appointment going to be? What other appointments am I going to have to make in the future? What sort of screenings am I going to have to get done? Do I just need to get an MRI? Am I going to have to go in for a colonoscopy? I'm probably going to have to go in for a colonoscopy, which I'm not looking forward to. I knew I'd have to get one eventually, but I wasn't expecting to have to do it at 25. But I kind of just like wasn't thinking about any of that stuff because I had a bombshell dropped on me. So yeah, I actually almost filmed this video before my post-op appointment because I was going to film this no matter what, just to like talk about getting my appendix out and how bizarre it was that it wasn't presenting like appendicitis, and like what a weird crazy day it was, which in hindsight, this is probably why it wasn't presenting as appendicitis. But yeah, I guess it's a good thing that I never got around to it. I fully was expecting the post-op appointment to just be like, yeah, everything looks good and you're done. Typically for post-op appointments for appendectomies, that's exactly how it goes. And I'm just one of the lucky few where it turns out that I have cancer. So kind of a bummer of an ending to this video. I'll keep you guys updated as I learn more about the situation. Fingers crossed that I go in for a couple of screenings and everything comes back clean. But yeah, just to reiterate, go to a doctor.